Welcome in, latest episode of that SEC podcast. I'm your host, Michael Bratton. Go by SEC Mike on the Twitters. And this is round one of the doubleheader, which means Steven Lassan's here to make his SEC predictions. Senior editor over at Athlon Sports. Steven, how's it going, my friend?
Mike, it's going well. We've got the playoff rankings. We've got some awesome matchups ahead this weekend. So I can't wait to get to the Saturday's action because these matchups are going to impact the rankings a lot next week. And of course, these matchups also play a pretty big role in the SEC championship chase too.
Right. So before we get to your picks, I just want to know, how confident are you this week? Yeah, we got nothing but SEC action to break down here. Are there any that you're feeling particularly nervous about?
Absolutely. I think the big ones, Georgia, Ole Miss, and Alabama, LSU are definitely hard to figure out. I would also throw South Carolina and Vanderbilt in that discussion too. I think the others. Oh, I should say Oklahoma, Missouri is I've agonized over that game all day today. So yeah, I guess that's what 4 of the 6 that I feel not very confident in. So
Perfect.
Stay away from those on our friends over at MyBookie this week.
Yeah, no doubt. And shout out, like Steven just said, they're MyBookie, the online sportsbook presenting sponsor of the show. Head on over to mybookie.ag today. Make an account. Put in that promo code, that SEC. That's THAT-SEC over at MyBookie. They'll double your initial deposit today. This is the number one way to help the podcast stay independent for life. But again, Steven, we're about to break down your predictions, your prize pick selections, but stay tuned. At the top of the hour, Cousin Shane will be on to do our latest edition of the SEC mailbag. So a lot to get into here, Steven. But let's start with the old prize pick selections. Again, if you're unfamiliar with PrizePicks, it's daily fantasy sports. We got to deal with them too. You go over there, you sign up for an account, you play 5, you get $50 instantly using the promo code SEC. So this week, Steven, there's a lot of great SEC options on the PrizePicks from several, well, really all the big games here in the conference. Which PrizePicks options stand out to you the most?
Absolutely. So the 2 games on PrizePicks, Mike, are the 2 biggest games of the week. So not only can you put a little bit of a wager on it, you can also take some fantasy. So it's really the best of both worlds here. But over on our friends at PrizePicks, Jackson Dart is at 300.5 passing plus rushing. I'm going to take the less than side of this. I could see this game being a little bit more on the lower scoring end, and we saw what Georgia's defense did against Texas a few weeks ago. So I'm going to play the less than side of this. In that game, I'm going to take Georgia receiver Arian Smith. He is at 56.5. I'm going to take the more than side of this. Here's kind of my thinking. We've seen Carson Beck kind of struggle with interceptions recently. Arian Smith has kind of been the go-to sort of clutch guy. And I think in this game, with the Ole Miss pass rush coming after him, you got to get a couple clutch plays. I'm going to guess that Arian Smith can maybe get one of those plus a big play. So I'm going to play the more than side of Arian Smith, 56.5. What do you think about those, Mike?
Steven, did you not just see Ole Miss score gazillion points on the road at Arkansas? Now they're coming home to face the decaying dogs here in a national spotlight game here. But no, I agree with everything you just said. I mean, again, Kirby gets his guys up for these big games. So I think Ole Miss can have some success, but I don't think Jackson Dart's going to go up and down the field on them like they are Arkansas defense. So yeah, I think that might be a little too rich for my blood. 300 overall yards for Jackson Dart. He's going to need the running game, I think, to really help him out, even though it's not quite been there up to Ole Miss standards this season.
Absolutely. And of course, the questions of injuries at running back. And also, we talked about this on the Monday show, but with the schedule that Ole Miss has, I could very much see Jackson Dart being heavily involved in the run game here. But still, like you said, Mike, the play here is, I'm guessing Georgia's defense is going to come to play on Saturday. And that's kind of why I like the less than side. So those are my 2 plays for Ole Miss and Georgia. Over in the Alabama LSU game, I've got 3 that I like. Jalen Milroe, 0.5 rushing plus receiving touchdown. I think you take the more than side here. We know LSU's had some issues against running quarterbacks this year. Jalen Milroe had a great game last season against LSU on the ground. All you need is one. So give me the more than side for Jalen Milroe, 0.5 rush plus receiving. I will also take the more than side of Jeremy Bernard. He is at 55.5. He's been over that total in 4 straight games. So, always a question, Brian Williams, Jeremy Bernard. Bernard's been pretty steady, and he's been over that total. So I'll take the more than side for Jeremy Bernard. And one more for you, Mike. Garrett Nussmeier. He is at 1.5 passing touchdowns. Give me the more than side of that as well.
Yeah, those almost feel like free money for those quarterbacks. Milroe scores a rushing touchdown seemingly every game, and particularly these big games, he really's got to step it up. And Garrett Nussmeier, I know some people probably writing him off after the second half there against A&M, but heading into overtime, people were probably writing him in as the Heisman favorite out of the SEC. So, yeah, I think he's closer to the Heisman type guy than he was the guy that made a couple key mistakes late in that game, and that was on the road. This is at home. So, yeah, certainly. I think this is a showcase game for both of these quarterbacks in this game, and I got a feeling they'll be scoring multiple touchdowns in this game.
It's an interesting kind of breakdown for this game is try to figure out like where the scoring total is going to be, because I think there's been some people predicting this game to be a little bit higher scoring. It feels like it's going to be somewhere in the middle, maybe not real high scoring, but not low scoring either. But I think this is, and I know we'll break this down, but this really feels like it comes down to the two quarterbacks. To your point, the interceptions for Nussmeier, I expect him to be motivated. We know Milroe's going to be heavily involved. 12 rushing touchdowns this season. I mean, that almost seems like you said, free money. You just got to get one. He's had 12 all year. So,
Steven, if there was a PrizePicks selection for a cousin, my top one would go to cousin JR. How about JR? Appreciate you, brother. He gifted another membership this time to Drew. Cousin Drew, welcome to the family. Thank you, JR. Appreciate you, buddy. But, all right, Steven, so you made your PrizePicks selections. Are you ready to get into the action? And we only got 6 games, so we got an opportunity to spend a little bit more time on each and every one of these. But are you ready to make some picks for the upcoming weekend?
Mike, I'm not feeling 100% confident, but I will be glad to give you my picks that are sure to be wrong.
Okay, perfect. Let's start here, Steven, with the largest point spread in the SEC this weekend. Mississippi State at Tennessee. Tennessee favored by 24 points at home. It's going to be another night game for the Vols, 7 o'clock Eastern on ESPN. Over-unders 61.5 points. Who do you like in this one, Steven?
So I think the storylines that I'm watching on Saturday, number one, we've seen Mississippi State has played well against Georgia. They also played well in the first half against Texas. So when they have played and also throw A&M in there, they've been able to trade some punches against some of the top-ranked teams. On the other side, you have a Tennessee team that is sitting in pretty good shape for the college football playoff. The fact that they were, 7th in the first rankings, ahead of Indiana, ahead of BYU. They have some obstacles, of course, with Georgia and Vanderbilt, but Tennessee's in pretty good shape to get in if they're 10-2. So you can't overlook Mississippi State to get to Georgia and to get to Vanderbilt. And I think that's kind of the setup for me is Mississippi State can be pesky, if that's a good kind of way to word it. And if you're Tennessee, the slow starts, don't overlook Mississippi State to get to Georgia, because the Bulldogs can at least score, which worries you if you maybe get off to a little bit of a slow start if you're Tennessee.
Right. So is there perhaps an advantage for Mississippi State in that regard, Stephen? Because again, now we're into this playoff era, 12-team, style points are going to matter. Apparently, I mean, it's the damn craziest thing I ever heard, Stephen. But the committee guys, the quality losses seem to matter more than quality wins or anything of that. So, I mean, not that this would ever happen, but let's just play out a scenario where Tennessee loses to Mississippi State, but they beat Georgia. Again, that's there's no chance that really happens, but just go with me here. The committee, the next week, the guy would be like, well, yeah, they knocked off number 2, but that's a bad loss, Mississippi State. We can't put them in there. So, again, that is an absurd comparison, but also it's like you got to score, and you got to score in bunches against a team regarded as the worst in the conference, and you're playing them at home, you're getting them at night. There's pressure not only to win the game, but to win it by a wide margin. Meanwhile, if you're Mississippi State, this is an opportunity, just like it, they may have squandered it there for Sam Pittman in Arkansas, but that was an opportunity at a signature win. They got it. They got the home field. They rushed the field. Different story for Jeff Lebby in Mississippi State, but if you can beat Tennessee, and who cares? Who cares if there's 9 turnovers and you win by 1 point? No one's going to remember that. They're going to remember you beat Tennessee in Neyland Stadium, and all of a sudden Jeff Lebby's got a signature win and something to sell his program on. So just strictly in terms of motivation, I would argue Mississippi State is in a more favorable spot here.
Yeah, I would agree with that. To go back to something you said on the committee, you can drive yourself crazy trying to extrapolate what the heck the committee chairman says, because they say, and I'm sorry to say it, they say the stupidest things to justify their rankings every week. It's one reason why we shouldn't have the ranking show, but I digress. I promise I will keep my complaints to a minimum about the committee, because it's not great. I'll just leave it at that. I think, yeah, to your point, Mike, it is an opportunity for Mississippi State to maybe catch Tennessee, maybe a little bit of sleep here, and the look ahead factor to the Georgia game coming up. I do think in terms of matchups, a lot of these favor Tennessee. Just the fact that the Tennessee defensive line could really cause some pressure on Michael Van Buren. Can Mississippi State stop the run? Dylan Sampson's having a kind of SEC Offensive Player of the Year caliber season. We know Mississippi State's had a ton of issues against the run this season. If you wanted to make a case, to me, if I was Mississippi State, I would let Michael Van Buren and Kevin Coleman and one of these receivers chuck it deep one time early on, try to score, shock the crowd at Neyland, get ahead early. I think the longer that Mississippi State can stay in this game, the more nervous you get if you're Tennessee. So I think Mississippi State's got a chance to keep it close, especially because they have the offensive weapons. And we know Tennessee's had some issues offensively, albeit Mississippi State's defense is the worst in the conference, and they've had a lot of issues in the first half. So I don't know what the first half line is, but that might be some value on Mississippi State if you're just looking kind of at some very obscure betting prospects this weekend.
Right, and there's in no way, shape, or form should Mississippi State be more potent than Tennessee on offense, yet I would make the case that they have been. Do you think that's fair?
I would still take Tennessee in that regard, because I do think Tennessee can get it together offensively over the course of the season. I keep saying that, and I still believe it, because I still think that they're capable.
You sound like Josh Heupel. We're just one play away. You know what?
Yeah, that's Jimbo. We're just inches. I mean, it really is in conference play. Tennessee is kind of at the same total they were last season, which is not where we expected given Josh Heupel's track record. Interestingly enough, in terms of SEC games, Mississippi State and Tennessee are back-to-back. So I think I would like to see, with the opportunity that Mississippi State's defense presents, I don't know if Tennessee's offense is going to get right, but I would like to see an outing where they sort of flex a little bit. Mm-hmm. And that would give me some confidence if I'm Tennessee going on the road to Georgia next week. So if they don't score 30 points here, I think I'd be a little bit worried.
Right. I think that'll be the key to the game, Steven, because again, they're 24-point favorites. You're going to win this game. Unless something crazy happens. But let's say Tennessee executes. There's few penalties. There's few drops. There's Nico's accuracy is on. Dylan Sampson's on. I mean, this is a defense that if Tennessee clicks, like you've been saying for 8 weeks, they're about to click, Steven. If they click, I mean, they can legitimately score 50 points in this ball game. Would you disagree with that?
No, I would not. Especially when you look at the success rate numbers for Mississippi State's defense, 133 in the country in defensive pass success rate. there's 134 teams in the country.
Right.
They're in the hundreds in rush defense too. So just based upon the matchups, and also we've seen what other teams have done to this defense, there is every opportunity that Tennessee should be able to put up some points in this game. And like I said, if they really sputter offensively, every week is different. Every week's kind of its own season, it seems, but I would be very, very worried if they go kind of sluggish offensively in this game, given the stakes of next week's game against Georgia.
Okay, moment of truth, Steven. Who you got winning this one?
I am going to take Tennessee. I am going to take them at, let's go 38-17.
Just first half or whole game?
The first half would be like 7. What are like?
Ooh, man! If even 38, I'd feel a little uneasy if I'm a Tennessee. Well, heck, I mean that'd be the best since old Kent. But I think Vol's got to score 40 here to feel good about themselves going into Georgia. I really do.
I would agree with that. I'm sort of looking ahead a little bit to that Georgia game, thinking Tennessee might be peeking ahead, and at least Mississippi State can score. They can trade sort of that, trying to close the spread a little bit. So I actually like Mississippi State on the cover in this scenario, just because of the look ahead factor. And we know Tennessee's had some really slow offensive starts this season.
Mm-hmm. All right, Steven, let's get into next game on the docket here. Florida at Texas. Steven, a massive point spread in this one as well. 21.5 points. The Longhorns are favored in Austin. The over-under's 47.5 points. And this is the 11 a.m. Central, noon Eastern game on ABC. So ABC must not know DJ Lagway's banged up. But again, that could change the outcome of this game. But what's your thoughts on this one?
Absolutely. So I think this game is hard to get a read on because of the uncertainty surrounding Florida's quarterback situation, the overall injury report. We know Eugene Wilson's out for the year, but this is a Florida team that is really banged up. But also on the flip side of that, they keep fighting and they keep finding ways to hang in games. So I think that's kind of the scenario here for me for Florida. They've been, despite all the injuries, they've been playing, relatively well considering that. But can they go on the road to a Texas team that has a ton of offensive firepower? And can they find a way to slow this game down and turn it into a slog, much like they did last week against Georgia? Because given the injuries, that's the big question. And then on the other side, you've got Texas at number 5 in the college football playoff. They just need to keep winning. This is with the schedule coming up. Arkansas, Kentucky, get to that A&M game with one loss, and they will be right in the mix to make the SEC championship game and the college football playoff.
Whoa, buddy, Steven, I hate to interrupt this program, but we have breaking news. Shout out Cousin Two Slick. He just gifted 50 memberships. Oh, my God. I wish I made as much money as Two Slick. Well, hell, maybe I do now with 50 memberships. Man, what a guy. I can't even go down the list, but basically everybody that's on this channel just got gifted a membership. Thanks, old Two Slick. Two Slick, hit us up, thatsecpodcast@gmail.com. Happy to send you any item of your choosing on our TeePublic t-shirt. You just tell me what you want. We'll make it happen, man. That's fantastic.
Appreciate you. That's super awesome to see that during the show, Mike. I have to admit, when you said that, I was actually worried Florida changed coaches, and I was having
I was just gonna say, I hope Two Slick is not a Florida booster, because he needs to hold on to his money, because they may need it here in a minute here with Billy Napier. But again, thank you.
Sliced bread from the rope.
Two Slick, you the man. Again, yeah. reach out, thatsecpodcast@gmail.com. I want to hook you up. But I lost my train of thought there, Steven. But yeah, again, so does anything change? There's conflicting reports. DJ Lagway may play. Seems very unlikely that he will. But, if he plays and if he's effective, does Florida have a shot in this game, you think?
I think it's tough.
Yeah.
I like the spot for Texas. They've had an off week, a chance to reset after a couple of tough SEC games. I think if you're Texas, I want to see this offense sort of get back on track. We saw the game against Georgia. Vanderbilt, they were a little bit inconsistent, and they've not been able to run the ball the last 2 weeks. 133 rushing yards in the last 2 games for Texas. So I would like to see this offense get back on track, see Quinn Ewers take a step forward after kind of being up and down the last few weeks in there. And kind of like I was getting at, Mike, I think Florida's got to turn this game into a very low possession kind of game. It's got to be 20-17. They've got to force a couple turnovers, short fields. Just don't have a lot of confidence if DJ Lagway is not able to go, that they're going to be able to generate enough offense. And also, their defense does look better, but by far, if you look at the stretch of games, Texas, from a weapons and firepower standpoint, this will be a big test just to see how far they've come along since the start of the season.
Now, what about Florida's defense, though, Steven? Is getting better and better and better. And our friend Matt Hayes, he was on the show last week. He said apparently there was a team meeting at Florida, and the players went to Billy Napier and said, "Hey, Billy, we gotta simplify this. This defense is just too damn complex." And ever since that meeting, the defense has been quite effective. This was apparently right before the Tennessee game, or no, excuse me, right before Central Florida game. So, they have given up. Again, Georgia scored 2 touchdowns late, and that was with the third string quarterback throwing interceptions. But I mean, they picked off Carson Beck a bunch of times. What I'm trying to get to, Steven, is they made Carson Beck look shaky at times. Can they do that to Quinn Ewers, who at times has looked awesome? I had him early in the season as a Heisman favorite out of the SEC, but not here lately. Steven, can Florida, can they get to Quinn Ewers? Can they rattle him? Can they confuse him like they have been Carson Beck and some of these others?
I buy that Florida's defense is better. I don't know to the extent that I would maybe say they are massively improved. To your point, the schedule, UCF, Kentucky, a struggling Tennessee offense. Also, Georgia giving the ball away, a couple, certainly forcing turnovers is good, but still 34 points. So I would like to see it here. I think if they play well, I think that's a good sign. The players going to the coaches and getting the scheme changed is a good thing at this point of the season. When just from a kind of how I would attack them, I think you got to kind of do the same thing. I mean, you got to be able to stop Texas run, be able to limit the big plays, make Texas go the length of the field. Don't let Ewers and Isaiah Bond and some of those guys hook up for big plays, because if they do, I just don't think Florida can trade punches. So this will be a good test. With as beat up as Florida's defense has been, they are showing signs of progress, but I think this game will tell us a lot. If they play well, if Florida wins, I think it's going to have to be on the back of the defense, just trying to find a way to keep this game, in the 20s to have a chance to win.
Right. So what's your final prediction for the game?
Mike, I've got Texas 34. I've got Florida 13. I don't see. Don't think Lagway plays, and I think Florida can turn it into a slog early. Texas just too much at some point with the offensive weapons.
Yeah. Is there any chance? I mean, this is kind of sad. I'm even asking this, Steven, but is there a chance where they lose by a touchdown, and then people are like, "We got to keep Billy. We're only losing conference games by a touchdown."
I mean, I guess it's viable, right? I mean, it seems like as each game progresses, it almost seems like they don't want to fire Billy Napier unless they absolutely have to. So a good showing here on a shorthanded team probably helps his case. I think the only way to do it is it's got to be 20-17. And I would suspect that Texas is just going to crowd the line and force the Aiden Warner to beat him through the air. I think it's a really hard ask to do if you're Florida in this game.
Mm-hmm. Okay, how about this one, Steven? Since it was announced, could not wait. Cousin Shade is already on his way up here, Shade. Steven, Oklahoma at Missouri. Heated rivals here, depending on who you ask. Missouri opened as the favorite, but it has flipped completely. I think they were 2.5 3-point favorites. Now Oklahoma, currently, according to my bookie, favored by 2.5 in this matchup. The over-under's 41.5. total points. This is a night game, 6:45 Central, 7:45 Eastern on the SEC Network. And as of recording, we do not know Brady Cook's status for this game. I had heard last week that it was unlikely that he will play, so that's just what I heard. But again, we'll get better confirmation tonight with the injury report. But what's your thoughts on this one?
I think the Vegas line is probably telling us that Brady Cook is not going to play. Now, that's just sort of using like context clues. I think there's probably obviously some money coming in on Oklahoma as the favorite here. But I think in the big picture, there's a chance for Oklahoma to get to 6 victories because their upcoming schedule, Alabama, LSU, it's a little bit harder. If you can win this game, get to 6, that's a big, deal considering the struggles that they had this season. Obviously not where Oklahoma wants to be, but given the struggles, if you can find a way to get to 6, that is a good thing for 2024. On the Missouri side, there's still a chance to get to 10 victories. If they win out, the schedule's pretty reasonable. But there is this the quarterback uncertainty with Brady Cook. Does he play? Does he not? And you also have the rivalry aspect of this game too. And I do wonder, which team does that favor? And it feels like it probably favors Missouri a little bit here at home. I think they probably want this game a little bit more maybe than Oklahoma. But either way, this is probably one of the bigger we got 3 or 4 games here in the SEC. They're just absolute toss-ups, and not knowing injuries or the offensive firepower of both teams makes it an even bigger toss-up for me.
Well, you say Missouri wants this one more, perhaps, but I would also argue that if Oklahoma doesn't win this one, they probably not going to go to a bowl game unless they turn around and beat Alabama at home or beat LSU at night. Well, I don't know if it's a night game, but at Tiger Stadium in the finale here. Both of those, well, I guess we'll find out more this weekend, but one of them likely is going to have playoff hopes on the line. So I don't know. Motivation, I think, is 50-50 for this game. I really do think.
Yeah, I could buy that. I think for Oklahoma, the motivation is pretty clear to 6. To your point, it looks a lot harder after Missouri. I think it's an old, rivalry, obviously, from the Big 12, but part of me thinks with Missouri getting Oklahoma at its place, that there's the rivalry angle plays in favor of Missouri here just because it's at home. But either way, I mean, the spread being what it is, kind of the circumstances, it is a very difficult game to project because, to your point, I would suspect that we see a motivated Oklahoma. Missouri's playoff hopes are over. So what happens to these teams that fall out of playoff contention? And as we get into November, it'll be curious to see what kind of Missouri we see shows up this weekend.
Mm-hmm. Which coach do you think will be facing more heat if they drop this one, though? Because again, I don't think Drake is anywhere close to the hot seat, even though I've seen quite a few of their fans are disgruntled, as they probably should be, given all the expectation, which I am certainly guilty of driving. But you lose this one. This is your big home game. This is a night game. It's almost like a must-win, regardless of whether your quarterback can play or not. But on the flip side, Brent Venables, if he loses it, what would that be? 2 out of 3 not going to a bowl game? They didn't go to a bowl game his first year, did they?
They were 6 and 7 that year, I think. They played, I think, Florida State in their bowl game.
Oh, okay, gotcha. Well, still 2 losing seasons. I mean, at Oklahoma, 6 ain't good enough. You know what I mean? You're supposed to be competing for championships out there. So, I don't know, Steven. I mean, which coach you think will face more heat if he drops this one?
I tend to think it's Venables.
Yeah.
Largely because I think if there's a chance that they go 5 and 7 this year, that he's probably on the hot seat for next year. And I think just any kind of data point trending in that direction is probably not a good thing. Whereas I think Drinkowitz, you could say hey, look, we didn't have Brady Cook. And I know the season's been disappointing, but there's still a chance maybe if they lose this one, they could bounce back. So I would probably lean Venables in that kind of question.
Well, you know where I'm leaning, Steven? Towards cousin Rick. What a guy. Just gave us $20. He says, winner of Ole Miss, Georgia, and Texas A&M games make the SEC championship. Looking forward to watching SEC beat the hell out of each other this weekend. Gig 'em as the Aggies are on a bye this weekend. We appreciate you, Rick. Even on a bye, he's showing it. Rick ain't on a bye. I do Texags every week, Steven. The guy, and he's a good guy, David Nuno. He's like, it's a bye. I'm not working. I'm like, it's a bye. You're not working. I'm coming on your show. It's like, what the hell? But
there's no off weeks in college football in the SEC, right?
I don't believe in bye weeks, though. I really don't. But yeah, okay. Back to this game. Sorry, but yeah, I mean, a lot on the line. How much does it change things? Given Oklahoma seems to be getting healthier, whereas Mizzou's kind of getting more and more banged up.
Yeah, I think that's a big question in this game too. I think combined injuries, health, plus the fact that Oklahoma offensively they've felt like they've got something going the last couple of weeks. Jackson Arnold and Barnes, of course, against Maine last week. They've been using Jackson Arnold's legs. Maybe there's just more cohesion offensively. I'm not sure the exact term to use there, but I know it's Maine. But still, it did feel like they've made some strides the last couple of weeks. So I do think maybe the cake is kind of baked offensively, given the injuries. But maybe there's a little bit more confidence. There's a little bit more cohesion. You get some guys back at receiver. That really, I think, in this game, I know if Brady Cook plays, I think you give the edge at quarterback, obviously, to Missouri. But if he can't go, then I think having Jackson Arnold, even with an offense that's not functioning at 100%, is an edge there for Oklahoma.
Any chance that, again, it surprised me. I don't know if it surprised you, Steven, but Missouri made a debut appearance in the college football playoff rankings at 24. Again, not where they want to be, but now that you see that, you see it's official. We are a month away. We're 24. We fight and claw and get to 10-2. I know people like me, I've already sold them down a river. Sounds like you have too, in terms of just making the playoff. But there's motivation there to say, hey, let's just keep winning. And the rest, who knows? All these teams ahead of them could lose a bunch of games too. I mean, there's a month left to be played. Could there be motivation that says, hey, we are currently in this poll. Let's just keep winning, keep grinding out, and maybe we can rise. Maybe we can make this thing.
I think you never say never in a situation like this, but it would be pretty surprising, I think, for them to be able to move up. If you want to make the case that Missouri could, I think you need Vanderbilt to keep winning. You need A&M and you need Alabama to keep winning, because all of a sudden those losses and wins look better, if that makes sense. And then South Carolina to go on the road and beat Clemson and to finish 8-4 if you count a Missouri win over South Carolina. I know. You asked me about Missouri. I think South Carolina was the biggest snub from the top 25 last night.
Oh, for sure. I'm just laughing at Bobby. Shout out Bobby. Comment of the night so far. Missouri goes to the playoffs if they buy tickets. I feel like that's. Again, I'm trying to make the case that maybe they're a little bit motivated here. You know what?
I think they should have some motivation, though. Certainly. You're getting Oklahoma at home with a chance to still be in the college football playoff mix, or you're alive if some chaos happens. But it's a rivalry. It's at home.
Yep.
The stakes are still pretty high here for Missouri. If they were 5-3 or 4-4, I would wonder a little bit more about motivation.
All right, moment of truth, Steven. Who you got winning this epic rivalry showcase? They used to play for the peace pipe, apparently. Let's bring back the peace pipe. That's what we should call this game, the peace pipe.
Bring back the peace pipe, the beer barrel, whatever. Right? Mike, I have to tell you, I've wrestled with this one all day. I like the fact Missouri's at home. I think defensively they're pretty comparable. Comes down to which team makes more mistakes, like turnovers. I think small things are going to matter. I'm going to bank on Brady Cook not playing. So I'm going to take the Sooners 20, Missouri 17.
Wow.
Take the under.
Yeah, I was surprised. I kind of be surprised if any of these teams score 20 in this matchup, to be quite honest with you.
13-10 is very realistic given the.
All right, how about this one, Steven? Another showcase game here with two teams that should be in a playoff ranking, but they're not. South Carolina at Vanderbilt. The Gamecocks favored by 3.5 after that big win last weekend against A&M. The over-under's 45.5 total points. This is a 4:15 Eastern kick, 3:15 Central on the SEC Network. Thoughts on this matchup?
here we go again, right? Top team wins a kind of an upset at home, goes on the road, and now, of course, that being South Carolina this week. We've seen this with Alabama. We've seen this, of course, with Texas, and then going into Vanderbilt. So this will be an interesting spot for both teams. I wonder for South Carolina, can they keep it rolling? The schedule coming up is very favorable. I think they have a chance to run the table the rest of the way. If you're Vanderbilt, here you are at home, another chance to get an upset. They're going to be doubted. They're an underdog here at home. They're not getting much respect. Vanderbilt should be in the top 25 too. And I think at this point, if the playoff is an extreme long shot for either one of these teams, so you're really about kind of positioning yourself in the SEC standings. You're positioning yourself for a bowl game, but still, the series has trended very heavily in favor of South Carolina. But also, there is the upset factor of coming off the huge win over A&M, the intensity, the emotion. Now you got to go on the road and play Diego Pavia. So this is a very difficult spot for South Carolina.
Who do you think has the quarterback edge in this matchup? Is it obviously Diego Pavia, given what we've seen, or heck, I mean, you can make the case Sellers keeps getting better and better and better, and maybe the equalizer, fair or not, because we can't give a accurate percentage on Pavia, but just watching the games, he seems limited. So let's I'm gonna do it, even though I said we can't do it. Let's say Pavia at 80%, or Sellers at whatever percent. Let's say 95. Who do you think's got the edge at the quarterback in this game?
Ooh, that's a good question. I do think, watching all of Lenore Sellers' snaps this season, like you can see some growth in there, and especially after just torching Texas A&M, you certainly see it. I would probably stick with Pavia in that situation, but I mean, if you'd asked me that 4 weeks ago, I probably would have been, pretty like a one-sided answer there. But I think it's gotten a lot closer. To your point, I think Pavia's health looms pretty large here, just because when you look at how this game sets up, and Clark Lee's talked about this this week, they can't get in third and long situations against this defense.
Right. And then what is your level of concern that South Carolina will have a letdown, if that's the right word? And again, not that they'll be disrespecting Vanderbilt or anything. We saw, we highlighted on the last episode, Beamer said, well, there's one team ranked in this matchup, and it ain't us. So, I mean, I think they'll be motivated, but just, having a win like that seems like, I'm trying to think. I mean, Alabama beating Georgia, then they fall, Georgia beating Texas, and then then they didn't fall, but they came close. You know what I mean? It just seems, I'm trying to think, all these big games, Kentucky beating Ole Miss, and then where the heck they been the rest of the year? It's you earn
LSU too. I mean,
LSU, Texas
they
A&M, beat. It goes on and on and on. This just seems like the year of you win a big game, then the next week you don't show up. So what's your level of concern that could happen?
Yeah, I would be worried about it if I'm South Carolina. I think it's tough to capture that intensity and that emotion after a big win to go on the road the next week. Maybe the one factor that would help South Carolina is Vanderbilt has their attention. I know Vegas has been disrespecting Vanderbilt all year, but the fact that Vanderbilt almost beat Texas and beat Alabama, I think South Carolina knows what they're walking into. And if this was a Vanderbilt team that maybe had lost Alabama, maybe they weren't as good, maybe they lost to Auburn, they were closer to like 4-4. Maybe I could see South Carolina kind of looking past, but I think just the way the season has played out, plus under Beamer, South Carolina does tend to peak in November. So I would tend to think that, yes, it is a concern, but maybe not as significant as we've seen some of these other road letdowns this year.
Mm-hmm. All right, Steven, moment of truth here. Who you like in this one?
Oh, man, this is another tough one this week. But, man, it's going to be such a great game. I think I have to go South Carolina here. Not a strong lean. I like South Carolina 23-20. I am very interested to see how Vanderbilt uses Pavia, plus the Tim Beck as far as his formations, creativity, what they can do to keep things away from Stewart and Kennard. But I just think if I'm going to kind of trust one of these teams in this spot, I'm going to take South Carolina in a close one, 23-20.
Okay. How about this one, Steven? Night game here in Tiger Stadium, Alabama at LSU. Alabama favored by 3 points. The over-under 58.5 total points. 6:30 Central, 7:30 Eastern on ABC. And man, Brian Kelly's got some great record here at home, 13-0 in night games, Tiger Stadium. He's 21-3 coming off a bye. He has not lost back-to-back regular season games since 2016. Thoughts on this matchup?
Complete moment of like college football nerd is the last time these two teams played in Death Valley was such a great game that I hope we get that kind of game on Saturday night because it was the overtime game with Jane Daniels. So I'm hoping we get a close one. But I think just in the big picture, it is a college football playoff elimination game. There is no way around it that the loser of this game it's hard to see a path to get in the college football playoff. So the stakes are high in terms of SEC championship, college football playoff, but also the coaching matchup. Mike, to your point, Kalen DeBoer has a chance to build some goodwill if he can go on the road and win this game. His teams at Washington, they pretty much stepped up kind of in the brightest spots when they needed to. You've got Brian Kelly, who's been good at home, chance to get another win over Alabama. So there is a lot at stake for the teams, but there's also a lot at stake as well, I think, for the two coaches.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no doubt. I mean, the expectations are through the roof for each one. And how they respond to a possible loss here will be very telling, be very, very interesting. Which coach you think needs this win the most?
I think I would lean Kalen DeBoer. I could make a pretty compelling answer to both sides of that one. It just feels like at this point of the season, with Alabama, the expectations obviously under Nick Saban were sky high. But if you lose this one and you have 3 losses, considering preseason expectations, and both were high for both teams, but I would probably go Kalen DeBoer here, a chance to build back a little bit of goodwill after, some ups and downs, to put it mildly, this year.
Which defensive deficiency concerns you more, though, going into this game? Is it Alabama's secondary or LSU's inability to stop a running quarterback?
Is both an acceptable answer?
Well, based on your prize picks, yes, I think that is acceptable.
Yeah, I think this, we kind of talked about this at the beginning, like, where is this game going to fall? Because, you look at the over-under and you kind of see the offensive weapons for this team. Like, you could see it being a little bit higher scoring. You could also see it that, in a matchup like this where both teams have had 2 weeks to get ready, you could see the totals being pushed down a little bit. I think on the LSU passing game, obviously they've got the weapons to stress this Alabama secondary. Offensive line for LSU, they do a good job of keeping pressure away from Garrett Nussmeier. But also within that, I think there's another word that adds up for me that I need to see from LSU, which is balance. Like, they need to get Caden Durham going. They can't just win it solely on Garrett Nussmeier's arm. So I think they need a little bit of balance here. But if they can do that, they can push the ball downfield against this Alabama secondary. Alabama has given up, I think they're 12th in the SEC in passing plays allowed of 30 plus yards. So they are vulnerable to the big play if you can protect. On Milroe versus LSU, it kind of feels like to me, Milroe was great against LSU last year. It feels like after 2 weeks of having to hear about the mobile quarterbacks and the stop in the run, it feels like Blake Baker and LSU will probably defend the run better. Now, maybe that's just me like overanalyzing this, but if I had to hear about it for 2 weeks, I think I'd come up with a better game plan, right?
Well, they better. Otherwise, they're going to be in real trouble come Saturday night. But you referenced the importance of being balanced for LSU's offense. Garrett Dellinger, offensive guard, he's out. He's not going to play. He had to have tightrope surgery. He's far and away their best interior offensive lineman. And heck, even with them, they were not that good at run blocking. So how big of a issue is that heading into a game like this where Alabama may not have an Alabama defensive front like of Saban prime days here, but I would still say they've got one of the better front sevens in all of the SEC.
If I'm remembering the A&M game correctly, it did feel like some of the interior pressure kicked up a notch after Dellinger went out too. So it is a huge concern, not only for just pass pro, but also what they can get out of Caden Durham in the run game. Because I think LSU could win with just Nussmeier just being a gunslinger on Saturday night and throwing it around. But I think we saw that kind of the growth of LSU when they beat Ole Miss was the defense played well. They were able to get a little bit of the run game going. Like they became a little bit more well-rounded. And this is something we talked about in the preseason, which was you lose Jaden Daniels. How do you replace that rushing offense? And it's got to be Caden Durham. So I am worried about that offensive line injury for LSU against a pretty solid Alabama front.
Yeah, last thing I wanted to ask you, Stephen, which staff do you have more confidence in here to make? Not that they're going to, bring out a whole new offense or defense or anything like that, but just which staff do you have more confidence in to get the most out of the bye, if that makes sense, and make the necessary adjustments to fix the issues?
I'd probably go Brian Kelly. And I think to kind of caps our discussion a little bit on the rush defense for LSU and how they defend the mobile quarterback, I would imagine they spent the last 2 weeks just focusing on ways to slow down Jalen Milroe. One other thing, too, we should note, when about 242 rushing yards for when LSU and A&M played, A&M was able to get on LSU. There's some opportunities here for the other running backs for Alabama to get involved other than Milroe. And does he look more closer to 100%? Because I think there was some question about, wasn't kind of playing up to the level we saw earlier this year. So to answer your question, Mike, I would probably lean Brian Kelly in that scenario and his staff and Blake Bateman.
All right, so moment of truth, Stephen. Who you got in this one?
Let's go the upset. LSU 27, Alabama 24.
Oh, the boy. Send his ass on down the river. I don't know if they got rivers down there, but they're going to need it after this one. All right, final game here then, Stephen. We got us a classic, hopefully. Could be a classic, could be a blowout, for all I know, given Lane Whiffen and his history in these big games. But Georgia on the road at Ole Miss here. Both these teams still alive for the playoff, fighting hard. Georgia, a 2.5-point favorite on the road. Over under 54.5 total points. 3:30 Eastern, 2:30 Central on ABC. Stephen, these two met last season. It was 52-17. Please tell me we're going to have a better game than that.
I think so. And I hope so, because it is probably the game that I am most interested in this week. Just at the most basic level, Georgia can win this game, move one step closer to the SEC championship. They get Tennessee next week, and also start to make that case to be the number one team in the college football playoff later this year when we get the final standings. Oregon's won right now, but if you're Georgia, you keep winning, they got a shot at it. For Ole Miss, this is the game 7 of the last dance. This is the Chicago Bulls with their back against the wall against the Utah Jazz, trying to keep the season alive. I think Oxford, of course, will be crazy. The stakes are extremely high here because if you're Ole Miss, it's a chance to get a sort of tenure-defining, kind of program-defining win for Lane Kiffin. But also, if they win this game, I think they're probably winning out against Florida and Mississippi State. At Florida will be tough. The Egg Bowl is always interesting. But this is it for Ole Miss. They shouldn't have lost to Kentucky earlier this year. So they've got to win this one to stay alive in the playoffs. So high stakes for 2024, but also for the coaching tenure of Lane Kiffin at Ole Miss.
How much does it concern you, though, Stephen, that Kirby gets his guys up for all these big games? Meanwhile, Kiffin, I call him Whiffen for a reason.
He
talks the talk, but he doesn't necessarily walk the walk here. And neither, I can throw Jackson Dart in there too. He seems to come up short in a lot of these big games.
I don't think I've seen Lane be too active on Twitter this week, have we? So maybe he's logging off to finalize the game plan a little bit, fine tuning. In all seriousness, to your point, I think that's every time when we think about Georgia and the national implications, I always go back to Georgia's A game when the switch is on is the best team in college football. And I know Carson Beck has struggled, but the effort that we saw against Texas, if that shows up on Saturday, and I'm sure Kirby's going to print off every article of disrespect out there that's on the internet and put it in the Georgia facility, because I suspect Georgia will show up with the same intensity that we saw against Texas. Ole Miss will have to match them, but there's also, with the bye week next week, and I mentioned this kind of on the Monday show, it also goes for Alabama too, because they get Mercer next week. This is an empty the tank kind of game. Whatever you have in the bag, you've got to use it. If that means running Jackson Dart 25 times, you've got to do it, because your season is on the line. So in that scenario, it's hard to pick against Kirby.
Mm-hmm. Hey, what if both these teams really struggle to run the football, which I don't think that's much of a stretch, because Ole Miss offensive line, they played effective last week, but that was probably their best showing. Now maybe something's clicked and they'll have a lot of success, but I would still heavily favor Georgia's front seven going against their offensive line. I think with Georgia, with their tailbacks so many banged up, not to say they have a bad offensive line, but I think I would still give the edge to Ole Miss and their front seven. Let's say Ole Miss got the edge there. So basically, I guess if it's coming down to Carson Beck and his weapons, Jackson Dart and his, who do you have more confidence in to win a game with maybe the game's on the line and a drive has to be made?
Is Trey Harris playing for Ole Miss?
I would, your point of throw everything out. I mean, if he's able, I have to imagine he'll play in this one.
I know this is probably going to sound strange. I think at some point the interceptions are going to subside for Carson Beck, and maybe that last week he got it out of his system. But on the road against a good Ole Miss front, I could see this being a pretty kind of, I would say, lower scoring defensive game here for both teams. So I guess to answer your question, Mike, the way that Carson Beck has played makes you lean Jackson Dart in that scenario. Is that crazy?
No. And would a win here vindicate a lot of what Ole Miss, Lane Kiffin, have done to build this team, to build towards this season, and would it erase the Lane Whiffen moniker?
I think it would definitely help. Now the question would be, do you follow this up with a win over Florida and Mississippi State to finish the job, to get to 10-2 and make the playoffs? So yes, I think it would be it'd be the best win of Lane Kiffin's tenure at Ole Miss. And plus, if you finish the job, I think we can maybe retire the Lane Whiffen name this year.
What would surprise you more, Steven, if let's say Ole Miss wins by 10 or Georgia wins by 20 or more?
I would say Ole Miss winning by that margin would surprise me more, because, Mike, to your point, every time when Georgia's back's against the wall, nobody believes in them. We know what happens, right?
Right, exactly.
Kirby gets those guys ready to play. So it would not surprise me if they dominated.
Even when Alabama jumped on them. What was the score? 28-0? Something like that? And it was like, my goodness, this is the end of Georgia. And they about won that game too. You know what I mean? So they're like the Terminator. You get them down a little bit, they're just going to keep coming back. I can't imagine. I'm trying to think. No, I don't think it's possible to beat Georgia by a ton. I really don't.
I almost think about how this game could play out and think that Ole Miss has to play perfect to win, whereas Georgia's probably has a little bit of wiggle room there. Like, they could probably survive a Carson Beck interception, but I think with the way that we've seen this Ole Miss Georgia play defense this season, that their front seven is going to get after Ole Miss's offensive line. And I think that's probably one of the biggest questions in this game is, how does Ole Miss navigate that? Does Trey Harris play? You had some other weapons step up in the last couple weeks. So there's no doubt that if Jackson Dart has time to throw, and we've seen other teams be able to connect on some of these passes, that they can move the ball. But also, I think their margin is a little bit smaller than Georgia's when it comes to like mistakes in this game.
Mm-hmm. All right, Steven, moment of truth. Who are you picking?
The Dogs. I go Georgia 27-24 in a close one.
Ooh, man. So, all right, you made all your picks. What is your lock? My bookie lock of the week?
You're probably going to give me a hard time for this one. I'm going to take Mississippi State to cover. Sorry, to lock as the week. I just think, with the way Tennessee's played offensively in the first half, look ahead, and Mississippi State can score. I think they can at least cover. So that's my lock of the week.
Yeah, no, I don't mind that one at all. I locked up Tennessee, and they damn near lost last week, I felt like. So
I did too. So
yeah, yeah, locking against them is always a smart play. But all right, so we got the picks in. I'm just thinking of this epic weekend of college football we got coming our way. So exciting. But stay tuned here in just a couple minutes. Cousin Shane's going to be jumping on, and we're going to do another episode of the SEC Mailbag. Got some great mailbag questions to answer here. Before you go, Steven, as always, can you tell the fine folks, all the cousins out there, how can they follow you? How can they find your work?
Absolutely. You can check out all my work over at athlonsports.com. You can follow me on Twitter at athlonsteven, Stephen L. CFB on Facebook and Instagram.
All right, Steven, I appreciate you coming by and facing all these tough questions, dropping all this knowledge on us. We do appreciate you. Best of luck this weekend, and enjoy the games.
You too, my friend. Enjoy the games. It should be a great weekend.
All right, I will be back here in just a minute.